Welcome to Goat Duels, everyone. It's that time of the year again where I show you the best, most interesting decks that did well in tournaments over the last 3 months. We got some new decks, we've got some old decks, and I think I'm going to start with the most interesting one. And that is this new take on Warriors by Easy to Slay You. This is basically, you look at some of these monsters and you're like, oh, it's kind of like a standard Warrior deck. But then what we've got here is the 2 copies of Jirai Gumo and the 1 copy of Swift Gaia the Fierce Knight. Now, I actually had the opportunity to play this deck on stream 2 weeks ago. Matches were close, but I didn't lose any. But I will tell you what cards I liked, what cards I didn't like, strengths and weaknesses of the deck, and so on. I actually think the Jirai Gumos and the Swift Gaia were quite good, right? That was actually like the part of the deck where I was like, wow, I like this. I want more of this. Now, Swift Gaia, you can't really play more than 1 copy because of the fact that if you are to draw both copies, then you just can't summon them. They stay stuck in your hand the whole game. So 1 copy makes sense. I think like 2 copies of Jirai Gumo also makes sense. You can go to 3 if you want. The monster that impressed me the least was DD Assailant. I just felt like it just was kind of there. It didn't really do a whole lot. There isn't really much big value offered by this card. Now, I understand like you want to have a lot of targets for your reinforcement of the army, but I could see like easily dropping 1 copy of DD Assailant for 1 Kaiku. I think that Kaiku is going to get a lot of value in most of your matches. And then you go down to 6 Warriors, which is enough to support 2 copies of Rhoda. I also was not like a huge fan of Compulse. Like, I understand why we're playing it. It's because we don't play a lot of monsters and we want to protect them from removal. But I think you could easily go down to like just 2 copies of Compulse. Like cut the 3rd for something else, maybe even like a 1 of Sakuretsu armor or something. The rest of the trap lineup is pretty interesting, so you have 3 Dust Shoots, 3 drop-offs, 3 time seals, and that can be very annoying for your opponent, obviously. Sometimes it doesn't work out for you, though, because like if you draw all of your drop-offs and all of your time seals, and then start drawing into copies of Trap Dust Shoot, like your Dust Shoot's going to be dead. So that is something that would like worry me a little. I'm thinking like even Dust Shoot, I think maybe you could cut that to 2. If you wanted, I'm not saying you have to, but it's definitely something that's on the table. To me, this deck felt a little fragile in my matches, in the sense that like, I think this deck has like a pretty high ceiling. I think like when it's doing the thing that it wants to do, it feels very powerful and very oppressive. But like if the slightest thing goes wrong, I think it can have trouble recovering, right? Like one of the things that I noticed is since you're playing like so few monsters, and yeah, you've got like 1 Call of the Haunted. Really, I think you could add like the Premature Burial here too. Like maybe cut the Compulse for Premature. But what can happen is like, if say like you open 1 monster, like it's easy to say like, oh, I opened my Jirai Gumo and 5 back rows. This hand is amazing. And it's like, yeah, but then what if your like Jirai Gumo just gets hit by a Sakuretsu armor? Or gets hit by a Raigeki break? Or something like that. Like you draw 1 monster and they just have an out to it. That, that can be problematic sometimes. Like I felt myself in these situations where like, oh, I have like all of these, drop-offs and time seals, but my opponent is just like attacking me with a Dekochi and I don't have any monsters. That can be tough. I also think, even though like the Jirai Gumos and the Swift Gaia, like they did impress me. But what I also think is like, you'll notice that this deck has no BLS. And BLS is one of the best cards in GOAT format, right? I mean, by a lot. Like, people complain about cards like Delinquent Duo, but I think BLS is like a more powerful card than Delinquent Duo. And having to give up BLS to play this stuff, I mean, that is a big sacrifice. Definitely a big sacrifice. If you were playing some alternate version of GOAT format where people decided that BLS was banned, I think decks like this would go up in value a lot. But, since BLS is in the format, to me, I just kind of feel like, yes, this deck has some stuff going for it, but like you could still easily be better off just playing a regular Warrior deck. And one thing that I also want to mention is, Warriors did very well over these last 3 months, won the most tournaments. And I know like people think, I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of people just think that Warriors isn't a real deck for some reason. Like it's not good. But I think like what we've learned more and more as GOAT format has evolved is that the old adage of Magic players that, oh, there's no such thing as wrong threats, only wrong answers, that has really like turned out to be true in GOAT format. And what we've also noticed over time is that stats matter a lot more than people think. If you went back in time to even say like 2018, 2019, you would have a hard time explaining to someone why a deck like this is good, right? It wasn't that long ago where people thought like, oh, Magical Merchant is like the nuts in GOAT format, right? Like, oh, it's a level 1, it's light, it draws you a card. People used to think that cards like that were good. But what we've figured out over time is that like, actually, cards like Tokochi that have 1400 attack are better. Cards like Gravekeeper Spy that have a really good defense stat and can go aggressive, those cards are really good. Cards like Zombira the Dark, which is a dark, it's a warrior, it has more stats than Blade Knight, cards like that are good. Even if you don't play this deck, I think a good lesson that you can take away from the success of decks like this is that stats really do matter. You know, the fact that, like, Jirai Gumo gets over Zombira the Dark is really nice. And it gets over Blade Knight. And it gets over Spy. You'll notice we don't play any copies of Ninja Grandmaster Sasuke in this deck because of the fact that we don't need it. We have the Swift Gaia, we have the Jirai Gumo. Now, I think, like, a weakness of this deck, and, you know, like, one of the matches I played on stream, it was versus Earth Aggro. And if my opponent, like, didn't play super badly, he would have beaten me, and he probably would have beaten me by a lot. And the reason why is Goblin Attack Force, right? So if you're thinking about like, well, what weaknesses does this deck have? Well, if you're relying on like a bunch of 2200 attack monsters, if your opponent summons like a Goblin Attack Force, all of a sudden it's like, oh my god, Goblin Attack Force, that card's broken. And it's like, yeah, versus this deck, Goblin Attack Force is broken. Same thing with any other monster that just happens to have more attack than this. Like, even if someone plays like a Mobius, I think this deck could like have trouble dealing with that because like it kills back rows and it has 2400 attack. So that is something to be aware of. This deck definitely has weaknesses. If people are siding in like triple Saku versus this deck, I think you can run into problems, perhaps. If people are like siding in, you know, even like triple Saku is plus like a Mobius, that can be tough. If, you know, you're expecting a lot of Earth aggro in your meta, probably don't play this deck. This deck, it has some good cards. It can perform. This is a concept that I personally would like to see, you know, the GOAT format community work on more because I think there's some potential here. There is a lot that we can learn about the game from decks like this, even if you decide not to play them yourself. So congratulations to Easy to Slay You for his second place with this deck. Another deck that I am also a fan of here is this unique take on Burn by Evans GR. Check out this list here. You know, I had been thinking to myself, like, over the last month that, hey, I think Burn is a good deck in GOAT format that has a lot of potential, but I think people need to evolve past Panda Burn. Because I think, like, in Panda Burn, a lot of the cards in that deck I actually like. You know, Justiceers plus their Geometrio, great combo. You know, Nightmare Wheel, amazing utility card that also burns your opponent. But I feel like the actual pandas in Panda Burn aren't that good, right? They make your opponents like Mirror Force live, or they make their Saku live if they play that card. Panda is like a really bad card against warriors, like, and people are playing that more. People just aren't playing Scapegoat also. Like, there's not a lot of Scapegoats in the meta, which is like kind of the whole selling point of Panda. You know, hey, if your opponent plays Scapegoat, you're just gonna own them. But like, no one really does. What I feel like is probably the optimal burn deck is going to be something that looks a lot like Panda Burn, but without the pandas. And I wasn't really thinking this deck necessarily, but I think this is moving in the right direction, right? I think this is kind of where we need to go, something like this. In that, again, we've got like Justice Urto Geometrio, we got the 3 Nightmare Whales, we've got sort of the other good cards that Burn is known for, right? We've got a Cylinder, a Ring of Destruction, a Ceasefire, obviously. We've also got Chain Energy, right? Over the years, people have figured out, hey, Chain Energy is actually one of the best burn cards in GOAT format, right? If you go first and you go, hey, I'm going to Meteor Destruction you, I'm going to set 4 back rows, and then I'm going to activate Chain Energy, people have a really tough time beating that. They really do. I mean, this Chain Energy, it can deal 2,000, 3,000 damage over the course of the game, and that is a lot. You can get a ton of value out of Chain Energy. So definitely like to see 3 of these. You'll notice here, though, something that I wasn't expecting. We're playing 0 monsters. That is right, 0. I mean, I guess, well, we play Scapegoat that puts tokens into play. But other than that, 0 monsters. So your opponent's crossouts are going to be dead. Their Ring of Destruction is going to be dead. Their Torrential is going to be dead. We're even playing Torrential ourselves. It's not a burn card, but hey, it kills things. Maybe it can clean up some Ojama tokens, deal some damage that way. Your opponent's Snatch Steal is going to be dead. You get the idea. I like some of the choices here. I do. I think this is an interesting take on burn. It's got weaknesses for sure. This is not a deck where you want to go up against Decree. I mean, every burn deck, that's kind of true to a large extent, but this deck in particular, we have 0 outs to Decree in game 1. And even like post-side, not a ton of outs to Decree. Well, we can Breaker it. We can Trunate it, but that only stops their Decree for 1 turn. So, this you're kind of hoping to dodge Decree if you play this. And I really think that Decree is still one of the most underplayed cards in GOAT format, right? It's great against Warriors, which is arguably the deck to beat right now. It's good against Burn. That's a real deck. I don't know. I think Decree is being slept on. But hey, as long as people aren't playing Decree, take advantage of it, right? Probably the most unique thing about this deck you'll see here, we've got 3 Brain Controls and a Snatch Steal. Now, Snatch, I think that's a little risky, right? Because if things go wrong, you can end up giving your opponent a bunch of life, and that's definitely not what you want. But the idea here with something like Brain Control, hey, it's like a better Meteor of Destruction, right? If you Brain Control someone's Blade Knight and swing in for 2,000, that's 800 to you, 2,000 to your opponent. Good trade. Versus Chaos, I don't know how much value you're going to get out of Brain Control, right? You could still Brain Control someone's Chaos Sorcerer, banish itself, I guess. That's not terrible. Yeah, there definitely are some decks in GOAT format where you can just get tons of value out of Brain Control, right? If you go up against Earth Aggro, plenty of great targets. You go up against Warriors, plenty of great targets. It's, it's a little hit or miss, but the hits are really good. Poison of the Old Man, I'm not sure if we need this necessarily, but, dealing 800, gaining 1,200, not too bad. One card that I like in burn decks that I think you could play in a deck like this is just Big Shield Gardna, just because people will attack into it, and even if they attack into it with a 2,000 attack monster, well, they're still taking 600 damage, which isn't too bad. And if they attack with something like a Dekochi, let's say, now they're taking 1,200. And, if the only monsters you play are say 3 big shields, well, you're still not making your opponent's crossouts live. So that's something that I could see, right? Maybe cut something like Snatch Steal, Jar Greed, Poison the Old Man for Big Shield. It's Big Shield, people don't think of it as being a burn card, but because of its high defense stat, it often is kind of a burn card. Side deck, I'm not sure how I feel about this. I think siding with decks like this is really hard if I'm being totally honest. And I think also the issue if you're playing a deck like this is that it's easy to say oh, I have 0 monsters in my main to make my opponent's crossout dead, and then game 2 they'll side out their crossouts and I'll bring in a Morphing Jar and Cyber Jar. The problem is though is that they just won't side out their crossouts. People will just figure oh, I guess my opponent didn't draw their monsters, so I'm gonna keep my crossouts in because they probably have them. So if you're hoping to really mind game people with the Morphing Jar, Cyber Jar, Giant Rat type of stuff, I don't think that's going to work. If you really think the Morphing Jar and Cyber Jar are so good, again, I think you could just put them in the main and play 3 big shields or something, right? Play 2 jars, 3 big shields is your only monsters. I think that is one direction you could go. We also got the Amazonas Archer, which, you can tribute off your GOAT tokens, but if you're up against a mirror, it's you can tribute off the Ojamas. Some of this other stuff, I'm not really sure about. I don't know why this one of Needle Sealing is here. Overall, my takeaway is that I don't think this deck is perfect, but I think this deck is going in the right direction, and I like the fact that burn players are figuring out, hey, there's more than one way to play burn than just playing a bunch of pandas. It's a very deep archetype, and there's a lot of good directions that you can go with this kind of strategy. I also want to highlight this 5th place GOAT control deck by Simon239. I think this deck here really has a lot of good meta calls, right? Obvious ones being Tuzaborg, very good against all the chaos decks. Spy, good versus everything. Tomato, good versus warriors. We've got Tomato to search Sanguine, to search Sinister for big synergies with cards like Abyss Soldier and Metamorphosis. Now, the only thing, to be honest, that I might change for this deck is I think you could just put the 3rd goats in the main. I don't think it's mandatory. Like, I don't think you need the third goat, but Scapegoat, definitely a good card, especially with all the warrior decks running around lately. I also don't think you need to play Abyss Soldier, but at the same time, like, I think it's fine. Pre, we also don't have like a lot of good pre-targets. The main reason that we're playing pre is because of the Abyss Soldier synergy. You can like premature Abyss Soldier and then use Abyss Soldier's effect, bounce back the premature. Premature on Tribe is also really good. Definitely some good value there. Reaper, we've got here for the tomato. Reaper is also just like a really good card in general. I've always liked Spirit Reaper in GOAT format. It's kind of card where like you really can't go wrong with something like that. As far as the traps go, like this is a fairly like standard trap lineup for GOAT control. I think right now it's like you kind of either have to go this route with like double solemn, or you go the route where you play like 2 or 3 decrees. And which one you go, I think to some extent that's like personal preference. To some extent that's like a meta call. Like I think versus the chaos decks, Solemn is better. I think in a GOAT control mirror, Solemn is better. But then versus Warriors, Decree is better. And depending on like the exact chaos deck you're up against, Decree can be really strong too. Like there are some chaos decks that play like 10 traps, which, you know, if your Decree is negating 1 out of 4 cards in their deck, like that's pretty good. So I definitely think you can go Decree. And I also think like you could side Decree here. This side deck is fine. Like I think it could be improved a little, but yeah, I would like to see some Decrees. Although, you know, instead of Decrees, we got double Mobius, which I think that's good. That makes sense. It is even like synergy with Abyss Soldier when we side it in, but you know, versus Warriors, like how often are we going to get the tribute for Mobius? I don't know, probably more often than you think, right? Like we've got the double Spies as tribute fodder. We've also got Mystic Tomato, you know, going like Tomato into Sanguine tribute for Mobius. That's like very strong against a warrior deck. These Berserk Gorillas, like to me seem like a little out of place. I think versus Warriors, like maybe you go something like Zombira the Dark or Cypher Soldier. You know, 2000 attack isn't as good as like 2100 attack or 3000-ish attack in the case of Cypher Soldier. I like the Azura in the side. I think like that's really good card to side for the mirror, for chaos control, and like 2 mind controls against chaos. That's fine. That works. You got to be careful with how you use them, of course, right? You know, try not to like mind control their set Sanguine or Sinister or something like that. Third goats, if you're not maining it, has to be in the side, and you know, like some Sakus and Dust Tornadoes. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, I think this deck is really good. Basically like a standard goat control deck, but like it's got a lot of good cards for the meta right now. I think the main reason that people don't play decks like this, you know, they don't really play goat control as much, is because goat control can be very unforgiving. It's the kind of deck where a tiny mistake can cost you a game, but like the games that you do win, they definitely feel satisfying and well-deserved. And I know some people will probably say like, oh, GOAT control, you can just never beat chaos. But like, that's not true. I mean, come on. We all know that's not true. You know, you've got Zaborg against chaos. You got Creature Swap, great card against chaos. You've got Solemns to negate like their power cards, right? Like if late in the game they top deck, I don't know, like a Graceful with double Thunder Dragon in their hand, like you can just Solemn that. You've got Dust Shoots against chaos. That card has always been good against chaos. And you even have like Abyss Soldier plus Dust Shoot synergy. That's kind of a nice little synergy, right? So yeah, I would give this deck a shot if you are a fan of control decks and, you know, maybe you've played chaos a lot and you want to try something a little different. This deck does a bit better against warriors than your typical chaos deck, I'd say. So that's like the main advantage that this deck has going for it. And last but not least, I want to highlight this first place Chaos Turbo deck by Michelle Cimino. The list is, I mean, it's pretty standard, right? You know, I call it standard Chaos for a reason, but there are some unique things here that I think we can talk about. Now, you know, I primarily put this on the list because, you know, I don't want people to think that, like, I forgot that this deck exists or that I'm snubbing the deck or something. This, I think, over the last 3 months, I think this was, like, the only Chaos deck that got first place. So I think that's worth talking about, right? This person was able to accomplish something over the last 3 months that even players like Anthony Alvarado did not. What is unique about this deck? Well, certainly not the monsters, right? This is like the most standard monster lineup for the Chaos Turbo archetype. Now, I don't think you need 2 Night Assailants. Like, I think you could cut 1 Night Assailant for something else. Doesn't even have to be a monster, right? You could cut 1 Night Assailant, go to 19 monsters, and add like another trap, but you don't have to. In terms of spells, I like that we have one Book of Moon. That's something that I've been harping on for a long time, is that, hey, Chaos players, you can't just get away with playing 0 Book of Moons. I mean, sometimes you can, but I don't think you'd want to take that risk. Book of Moon, great against like Goat Control, like the deck that we just highlighted a second ago. Great against Chaos Control. I think it's like even fine in the mirror, right? Like if you have it to protect your Sork, that's like a really strong interaction. You got lots of flip effect monsters. That's a strong interaction. Even fine against like some of the warrior decks. Like people have pointed out that like, hey, Jirai Gumo only has like 100 defense. So like, hey, you can Book of Moon it, easily run it over. We've got the one Mind Control in the main deck. Players have been kind of going back and forth on this for a while. Should you main deck Mind Control? Should you not main deck Mind Control? I think maining one is fine, if I'm being totally honest. Yeah, it's not good against warriors. It's pretty much like a dead card there. But in the mirror, you're definitely going to get some good value. Even versus Goat Control, I think sometimes you can get value, right? You just have to be careful about how you use it. If you look at the last Goat Control deck, like, yeah, the set Tomato, that's something you don't want to Mind Control, but set Spy, that's something that you do want to Mind Control. If your opponent has like a Spirit Reaper face up, well, you can just Mind Control that and instantly kill it. That's pretty nice as well. So I think you can get away with running one Mind Control. I really do. I also like the trap lineup. I think the trap lineup is pretty good. I definitely think you want the Mirror Force and Torrential. I mean, this is probably the 10th time I'm saying this, guys, but like these cards are good. Warriors are winning like half the tournaments. Like you really want the Mirror and Torrential against decks like those. Raigeki Break, like, I think as far as like Raigeki, Breaker, Wing Blast, I think you can play either or. They're kind of like two different styles. You also don't have to play 3, like you see some Chaos decks playing only 2 Raigeki Breaks. Like, I think that's totally fine too. 3 Jog Reads and like 2 Upstarts, I think is also fine. Personally, me, it's like, I've liked Jara Reed better than Upstart lately, and I've talked to like a lot of other players who have said the same thing. It's just nice because you can use it to like bait out people's Heavy Storm, bait out their Breaker, whatever. You can use it to sort of set it and like play around Dust Shoot without really making yourself vulnerable to Heavy Storm as well. This side deck is like pretty standard as well. You'll notice that like, hey, we don't have any Dust Shoots in the main, but then we have 3 in the side. So in a way, this deck has a lot of stuff in common with like Anthony Alvarado's winning list from Worlds, right? We've got 3 Jargreed's main deck, Dust Shoots in the side. We've got the Book of Moon in the main deck. That was also something that Anthony did, except Anthony, he had 2 Book of Moons. So, I'm not sure if this is like a trend necessarily. I think Dust Shoot is probably one of those cards that people are going to keep playing because like, oh, well, it's too good not to play. I have to. But depending on like how the meta evolves, I think you can go either or. And like, it's kind of interesting here because this player decided that for the mirror, like if you're thinking about cards that you're playing for the mirror, that Mind Control would be better than Dust Shoot, which is kind of interesting because in a way, it's like, I think Mind Control can have synergy with Dust Shoot in that you can Dust Shoot your opponent's hand, kind of see what they're doing, and then maybe like send back the monster that's like a bad Mind Control target, like send back their Sanguine, and then go, well, I'm leaving them with like a Dokochi and a Spy, and then I can Mind Control one of those. So to me, like, I think it's interesting to main deck Mind Control, but not main deck Dust Shoot. Like, I think what a lot of people will do with a list like this is they'll go, well, I like a lot of the cards here, but I'm going to cut like 1 Mind Control, cut 1 Jargreed, and play 2 Dust Shoot. And I think that's fine. I think that's something you can do. I'm wondering, like, sometimes I see like a deck list or I see a play and I go, I wonder what the logic was, right? I'm not saying the logic is wrong. I'm just saying I wonder what the thought process was that, oh, I don't want to play Dust Shoot because it's only good in the mirror, but then I'm also going to play Mind Control, which is like an even more situational card than Dust Shoot in many ways. You'll notice in the side here, we're even going up to like 2 Mind Controls. Second Mind Control comes in for the mirror. 3 Dust Shoots come in for the mirror. And then like a Kaiku comes in as well. So we're definitely very well prepared for the mirror. And then you'll notice also like very well prepared for warriors. Double Zambara, which, not too uncommon, but it's not something that everyone plays. And we've got 2 metas and 2 goats and 2 Sakus. So that is 8 anti-warrior cards. And I assume like the MST probably comes in for warriors too. Maybe, I don't know. So that makes perhaps 9. I don't know. I think MST, to me, that's like another card where I would just rather main it. And by maining it, you also sort of save space in your side, right? If we main this MST, we get to side like one more card. You'll notice like we're kind of lacking against burn, right? Because like think about like how awful this deck does against burn, right? We have no MST in the main deck. And then for burn, we're siding in, well, the one MST that we'd normally be maining plus one Mystic Walk. And that's it. So like this player was basically saying, hey, I hope I just completely dodge burn like the entire tournament, which I guess he did. He got first, so, you know, you showed me, I guess. But yeah, I think you could, like, main this MST and then maybe, like, side the second Mystic Walk in place of the MST or some sort of other anti-burn card. As far as, like, other cards that some Chaos players play and this player wasn't, like, Solemn is another card that I think you could play. I kind of like one of Solemn and Chaos. Like, the idea is if you only play one copy, statistically speaking, you're more likely to see it later in the game at a point where your life points aren't as likely to matter, right? Because if you only have 3,000 left and like you're paying half, that's not really too big of a deal. Whereas if you have like 8,000 and you're paying half, that kind of is a big deal for a deck like this. So I think there's some ways that you could change this around. And I mean, there are some things that I like. You know, again, I like the Mirror and the Torrential. I like the Book of Moon. And I think you can get away with the one Mind Control. Although, again, I'm not sure if it necessarily makes sense in this list without Dust Shoot. But I think it's fine. And like at the end of the day, you got to realize, guys, you don't have to play like the 40 card optimal Chaos list, whatever, right? Like you have a ton of good power cards, Sorcerer, BLS, Trinity. And like, if you just play well, you're going to do fine, right? So don't sweat it too much. So let me know, guys, what you thought about all these decks. And if you want to see Anthony Alvarado's first place Worlds Chaos deck list, you know, just for comparison purposes, if you want to go look that over, it's right here. Got a link at the end of the video. Go check that out. Also a great deck list.